Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you all to the third Breathe In Dialogue as part of the Cleaner Air and Better Health Project, also known as the CABH project. These dialogues are envisioned as platform for generating discussions on indoor air quality issues, concerns, and solutions. We will be bringing to you topics under various themes such as regulatory convergence, design and technology, monitoring and management, and occupant awareness. These dialogues are curated by us at Environmental Design Solutions, along with a knowledge partner, the Society for Indoor Environment. Today, we have a diverse range of speakers and experts who will be sharing their experience, research, and perspective on monitoring and management of indoor air quality. You can look forward to an engaging discussion with the esteemed speakers and participate in interactive sessions. Let me begin with a little brief about the CABH project. So it's a 5-year project supported by the USAID with the aim to strengthen air pollution mitigation and reduce exposure to indoor air pollution in selected regions of India. The project is being implemented by a consortium led by the CEW and includes Environmental Design Solutions, ASAR Social Impact Advisors, Vital Strategies, and Environmental Legal Defense Firm. We aim to achieve the project's objective to strengthen air pollution mitigation and reduce exposure to air pollution in India through consultative processes, evidence-based, and targeted approach. The consortium is working to scale solutions across the states in the country. We are also piloting innovative models to tackle the emission and indoor air pollution in different sectoral interventions. We are talking about forming an ecosystem that enables adoption of cleaner practices in multiple sectors and between various stakeholders to accelerate clean air goals. This will be done by creating a result-based, impact-oriented playbook to scale solutions and influence the clean air disclosure. All of this is based on a 5-pillar solution map, which consists of enabling monitoring and regulatory reforms, using the data for decision-making, sectoral transition to clean energy through innovative solutions, empowering citizens through outreach and awareness, and finally, equipping institutions with relevant capacity for informed decision-making. The Cleaner Air and Better Health project is built on the foundation of innovation, the synergy of integration, and the commitment to implementation for a lasting impact. When we consider this impact, we aim to achieve what we really aim to achieve is that we are targeting a nearly 50% reduction in air quality improvement in the areas covered by the CABH through various interventions. So it's about creating a legacy of cleaner air and better health by building solutions that scale and institutionalize best practices. We are ensuring a brighter future for all. So when we look at indoor environments, there are some pollutants at certain levels that could pose an elevated risk to occupants. The trick to good indoor air quality, also known as IAQ, is to know what contaminants are of concerns and what strategies are required to bring these at breathable levels. So this will be the main focus of our today's dialogue on prioritization of indoor air pollutants. So please feel free to use the chat function to ask any questions. And we will also have some interacting polls. So do keep an eye on the screens after each session. My name is Dipanjali, and we are honored to have our esteemed speakers, Dr. Benjamin Jones from University of Nottingham and Dr. Sunil Gulia from CSIR NIRI, along with my colleagues, Ms. Nidhi Gupta and Ms. Lakshmi. I would now like to request Lakshmi to set a context for today's dialogue. Over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you, Dipanjali. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. The guidelines on indoor air quality parameters across the globe have advanced over the years, um, improving the goals and management strategies towards enhanced IQ. Various entities such as government departments, building rating systems, professional associations have been working towards identification of these parameters and setting their exposure limits. Some of these regulations are focused on industrial environments, wherein we have organizations that work for occupational safety and health set the exposure limits to these contaminants. Whereas we have other guidelines that focus on, say, offices, uh, residential buildings, public spaces, to name a few. We have also seen that some countries have developed policies to control specific parameters. For example, tobacco smoke, radon, formaldehyde. And then these parameters, in fact, along with dust mites and mold, were the initial triggers or drivers towards indoor air quality studies. When we look at the threshold levels set for IAQ parameters across the countries, two things are evident. One is the parameters considered are not uniform across the countries. And secondly, the exposure limits of these parameters are also set differently or using different parameters and metrics. The most common IAQ parameters considered globally are carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, the PM 2.5 and PM10, to name a few. And then we have very few countries who have probably regulated biological contaminants or sulfur dioxide, etc. But then the pandemic has triggered, deeper studies towards biological contaminants as well. Now, many nations, including India, have prioritized and then set exposure limits of these indoor air quality parameters. But then to understand the variations of these exposure limits, let's look at a few of them where the metrics are aligned. So if we look at the threshold limits of carbon monoxide, we see that the World Health Organization has prescribed the level at 10 milligram per meter cube. We have almost all the countries in the list: USA, Singapore, Australia, and Malaysia, close to this number, whereas Hong Kong has a slightly stringent number of 6.1 milligram per meter cube. Similarly, when we look at PM10, we have, again, there is a range here. World Health Organization has set the limit at 45 milligram per meter cube. We have Australia close to this, and then we have USA, South Korea, and China on the other end of the band. Again, for PM 2.5, we have WHO prescribing the limit at 15 milligram per meter cube. We have Belgium at the same level. We have Australia also Australia at 25, USA and China towards a lenient side. We have Dr. Sunil Gulia today, who would discuss more about the PM 2.5, PM10, and the rarely discussed PM1. Again, if you look at ozone, the World Health Organization has set the limit at 100 milligram per meter cube. We have Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, even Belgium at the same level. We have Hong Kong slightly lenient towards the number of 120 milligram per meter cube, and then USA and Canada with stringent thresholds. So all in all, while we have come a long way in the studies on IAQ, there is a need to have a common ground on which we can prioritize the IAQ parameters and also regulate them, and that in various indoor environments. Dr. Benjamin Jones will add more insights on this. And this direction could help countries to develop policies or improve the existing ones, so that these policies drive public health and well-being effectively. That said, thank you so much, and back to you, Dipanjali.
Thank you, Lakshmi, for giving us a quick overview of the IAQ guidelines across the globe. I'd now like to request everyone who has joined us today to participate in the poll, which will pop up on your screens. We can wait for a minute for everyone to answer this. Please feel free to use the chat box if you think there are, other pollutants that you think are harmful. Thank you, everyone. So the majority believe that particulate matter like PM 2.5 and PM 10 and also carbon monoxide possess the greatest harm to our health, which is very interesting. Now, how do you determine if a particular pollutant is of concern, which has a direct effect on our health and comfort? So today, Dr. Benjamin Jones will walk us through the development of harm-based indoor air quality procedure and the rationale behind prioritizing indoor air pollutants based on the chronic harm they may cause. The focus of Benjamin's work is on measurement and modeling approaches to the indoor environment that can inform policies to create low carbon and healthy building stocks. He is particularly interested in the energy efficient ventilation of buildings and its relation with indoor air quality and occupant health. Dr. Benjamin has supported the pandemic responses of the UK and the Chilean governments and worked on ASHRAE Standard 241 that aims to control infectious aerosols. It's my pleasure to now hand it over to you, Dr. Benjamin.
Thank you very much. Lakshmi has really set me up perfectly for this talk. Thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to talk to you all. I hope you're having a good day. This talk is entitled "Dallying with Dallies: Why Acceptable Indoor Air Quality Should Consider Harm." And I often have discussions with colleagues and like-minded people about what indoor air quality actually is. And we can generally agree on two of the three words, in that we're interested in air in the building and probably around it too, because you might have to bring that in order to ventilate your space, in order to do various things, include provide thermal comfort and dilute contaminants. But if it is itself contaminated, that may be an issue. So we're interested in that. So then we're interested in parts of the air, but not all of it. We're not interested really in the nitrogen, the oxygen, and the argon, which are the main components over it. No, we're interested in the things that are not normally present in the air, which we term contaminants. You may then determine that a contaminant is a pollutant if it's believed to cause harm at the concentration at which you're exposed to it. But I will refer to all pollutants as contaminants today. It's just easier. The word then that normally causes the most disagreement is the word quality, which is it's a measure of excellence. It's a relative parameter. So, you know, the horse was considered an excellent mode of transport until we invented the car. So what is acceptable today or in terms of quality may not be acceptable tomorrow. But what are we considering indoor air quality to be when we say it is of good quality or acceptable quality? Is it relative to an uncontaminated state or what? I think these are important questions that we need to answer. So how should we think about indoor air quality? Should we strive for the best, the most excellent quality possible, or should it be good enough? Should it be acceptable? What would make indoor air quality acceptable? I particularly like the definition given by ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers. And this is its definition from its standard 62.2, which regulates dwellings, ventilation and air quality in dwellings. And it says that acceptable indoor air quality is air in which there are no known contaminants at harmful concentrations determined by cognizant authorities, and with which a substantial majority of the people exposed do not express dissatisfaction. They then go on to define what a substantial majority means. Various European standards talk about acceptable air quality, but don't define it. But I know that some colleagues don't like the term acceptable because it doesn't strive for excellence or good. But in this context, acceptability is not a categorical variable. It's not something on a scale. It either is acceptable or it is not. It is a binary. So therefore, the criteria of acceptability might change over time. So a building that is acceptable today may not be acceptable tomorrow as new evidence emerges about which contaminants cause harm to us and at what those levels of harm our concentrations were exposed to. So if we think about indoor environments, we might have the emission of a contaminant. It might then mix in the space. If we're present in it at the same time as the contaminant, we are exposed to it. If we inhale it, then we may receive a dose. Notice here that I'm only talking about inhalation exposure. I'm not talking about dermal exposure. The work that I'm going to talk about is solely for inhalation. Anyway, once you've inhaled the contaminant, you might exhibit some response. And that response might occur immediately, in which case it would be very visual, very obvious, or it might take time. Now, if it's over a period of less than 24 hours, we tend to refer to that as being an acute response. And if it's over 24 hours, and normally, generally, we're talking decades here, then the response is known as a chronic response. And it's very important to differentiate the two. I'm going to talk solely about chronic responses here. Now, the survey that we've just done looked at the two contaminants that were picked out as believed as being the most harmful: carbon monoxide and particulate matter of various kinds. Well, carbon monoxide is one that we are interested in over the acute domain because it has the potential to cause serious harm and death over very short time frames. So particulate matter, on the other hand, generally the response is over a much longer period of time. It is a chronic contaminant. So I think it's very important to differentiate between the two. So you're not really going to see carbon monoxide in my talk today. You are going to see a lot of particulate matter. So we are talking about indoor air contaminants, we are talking about inhalation dose, and we are talking about chronic harm from that. So what might that harm mean? Well, if you're born at a certain time, you might start to be exposed to that contaminant straight away. And over a period of time, you might then start to experience some form of disease or disability as a consequence of your exposure to that contaminant. And that may lead to your early demise, regrettably. There are a whole bunch of metrics that we use these days to consider indoor air contaminants and to regulate them in buildings. The Air Infiltration and Ventilation Center, which is an international energy agency annex, we held a workshop in Brussels in 2017 to consider different air quality rating metrics. And if you go to its website, aivc.org, and download Ventilation Information Paper number 36, you can see a review of that workshop. Nevertheless, we were looking at metrics that do a range of different things. The first might be a rating system, where you have a tick box exercise, which might be helpful for somebody with a specific allergy, or then you might have sub-indices, which measures many contaminants to gain a big picture of what's going on, and then averages them all somehow. This can lead to problems where the individual exposures to all contaminants is okay, but somehow or rather the metric says it's okay, but individual thresholds may be exceeded, and that depends on the weighting. Exposure limit values are considered generally in occupational domains. And so if you have a plot of concentration changing over time, the exposure limit is the area under the curve. And so when the value reaches a certain magnitude, then all things have to stop and you have to leave the environment. Mostly though, and again, Deepanjali here highlighted that we are most interested in threshold values. And these are values of a contaminant averaged over time that must never be exceeded. We have a problem with these, and that is, it's not clear how a change in, say, 10% of the value would change your health and your risk. And this is particularly interesting because, as Deepanjali pointed out, there were very different metrics used for different countries. So how did they come to those conclusions? Well, I can tell you, for their difference, that is, I can tell you that they're largely political. And that's not okay. That's a subjective representation of a metric. We need something that is a little more objective. How do we select contaminants and their thresholds objectively? I just want to draw your attention here to WHO thresholds for key contaminants, PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. And so here they have threshold limit values of 5, 10, and 60 micrograms per meter cube, respectively. We'll come back to those in a minute. Now, if we're interested in the harm that contaminants cause, we might want to use a metric that actually measures harm, because as I've identified, the threshold limit values don't do that. As I said, if you exceed them by 10%, does that change the risk to your health by 10%? So we just don't know. There are two commonly used metrics today that are termed health-adjusted life years. The quality-adjusted life year is commonly used in the UK, it's used in Thailand, it's used in the Netherlands. And it considers the number of years lived in full. So you can see along here, and then it's interested in this years of life lived with a disability. So it's interested in the white part of this whole rectangle. The disability-adjusted life year is used by the World Health Organization and is interested in the shaded area of this rectangle. So it's interested in the incidence of disease and then the actual death from the disease. And so the years of life lived with the disability and the life years lost to premature death. And it looks a bit like this. It's calculated. I mean, the sum looks very straightforward. The analysis behind it is less straightforward, but it is the sum of the years of life lived with disease or disability plus the years of life lost. And we like this metric because it gives us an objective indication of harm, and it enables us to put a cost on it eventually if you're looking at treatment. So what is acceptable harm in disability-adjusted life years? So here are some values for alcoholism, smoking, and transport injuries, which come from a database of DALYs. Alcoholism is 1,200, smoking 2,600, and transport injuries 1,000. So there's some interesting perspective here on disability-adjusted life years. Disability-adjusted life years, or DALYs as I'm going to call them here on, have been used to look at indoor air contaminants before. And I got to know my colleague Max Sherman from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory pretty well as a consequence of this plot. Now, as an academic and as a professional nerd, I'm allowed to have a favorite plot, and this is it. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories reviewed 77 studies reporting on indoor air contaminant concentrations in the US and in some other countries with similar lifestyles like the UK. So they started by considering 267 chemical air contaminants in total. And, excuse me, I just managed to knock my computer over. And then they calculated the annual health impact of contaminants considering the total intake in houses, in addition to contaminant exposures outside. So the in-house inhalation of air with the mean exposure from the studies was then considered relative to the theoretical case of no inhalation. So this is the change in disability-adjusted life years relative to not breathing any contaminant in at all over one's life. Now, you can see that along the x-axis are a range of contaminants. But on the y-axis, you've got the disability-adjusted life years lost per 100,000 persons of population. Now, each of these horizontal lines here, 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 and here, it's a logarithmic scale. So they're 10 times worse than the line below. So a difference here between particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 microns or less and secondhand tobacco smoke is an order of magnitude. That shows that PMs are probably, according to this study, the most important contaminant. I think the other takeaways from this study are secondhand smoke and radon. They can be dealt with pretty easily. You can make people smoke outside. And that's something that we can all implement in our lives. We can ask those who do smoke to please not do it in the buildings that we occupy. Radon can also be treated both before the construction of a building and post-construction too, which means that you probably don't want to regulate those two. You just want to make that's more a matter of source control. Then we have formaldehyde or acrolein or acrolein, as my American cousins would say, that also seem particularly important. So here on then, I'm going to take this study as a starting point, and I'm going to consider exposure in homes. So it's chronic exposure from inhalation solely in homes. And using that context, then I'm going to introduce you to the work that I've been doing with Max Sherman here at the University of Nottingham. And we wanted to identify the most harmful contaminants in homes around the world so that they can be prioritized for removal. Now, to do that, we had to do four things. First of all, we had to build on the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory study. We took their methods and we augmented them, we hope, using existing epidemiological and toxicological data to determine a new metric. And this new metric is the harm intensity. And that's the unit mass or the unit concentration of a contaminant that leads to harm over a lifetime. So it relates harm to the mass exposed to. That's the first thing. Second, then, we had to determine the uncertainty in contaminant concentrations in dwellings. The third, then, was to combine the harm intensities and the concentrations together. And then by identifying the harm of each contaminant, we can then rank the contaminants by the harm that they cause. So let's start off by talking about the contaminants. I can tell you what we found and how we did it. So on the x-axis here, you've got all your contaminants, and most of them have a units of micrograms per meter cubed, but radon has becquerels per cubic meter, and mold has colony-forming units per cubic meter. Again, it's a logarithmic scale, so each horizontal line up is 10 times worse than the one below. We looked at 136 studies, which gave us 827 data sets, so it is a massive database. And I can tell you that the most reported studies, the most reported contaminants are PM2.5, followed by formaldehyde, toluene, benzene, and then nitrogen dioxide. Most study doesn't mean that they're the most abundant in the air, though. The most abundant in the air is actually ethanol by mass, and then followed by PM10 here, and formaldehyde, and then PM2.5, and then nitrogen dioxide. So they're the top most abundant by mass. If we put that into some context and use a tree forest plot, you can see that by mass, it's clearly then ethanol, PM10, formaldehyde, PM2.5, form the vast majority of mass of contaminants in indoor air in homes. Now, the homes that we looked at generally come from what we call the global north, predominantly from the US, the UK, Canada, and China. I did have a look to see if we'd reported any Indian studies. I'm sure there are some in there, but I'm guessing that there are not many studies of contaminants in newly constructed homes in India. So you guys need to get to work and start publishing on that so we can add it to our database and make it more representative. This is a slide that shows the system diagram of our harm model. Now, you'll be very pleased to know that I'm not going to go over this in any great detail. We have a paper that's just nearing the end of peer review now that details that in some, well, quite a lot of detail. So we have our harm intensity metric, we have our epidemiological model, a toxicological model, a meta-analysis that draws those both together where data exists from both models for the same contaminant, and it does in some cases. And reassuringly, the data that comes from harm or tox models for the same contaminant is very similar. We then take our indoor air concentrations, we combine it with our harm intensities, which enabled us to determine harm. Now, we use a linear relationship for the dose response because the dose response relationship that's commonly used in health impact assessments it looks like the curve here that you can see on the slide. But for the contaminant concentrations generally found in homes, we're operating at the linear part of it. And it's good modeling practice to always linearize your data if you possibly can. So essentially then what we end up with is this simple equation where you have harm in disability adjusted life years per person per year times the contaminant concentration, which is generally micrograms per cubic meters, times this new metric, which is the DALYs per unit concentration per person per year. So it's the DALYs per unit mass of concentration per person per year that forms this harm intensity metric. And so per unit mass inhaled, you can see that here again, we have our contaminants on the x-axis and a logarithmic y-axis for the harm intensity. We can see then that the most harmful contaminants are PM2.5, PM10, chromium, and formaldehyde. Now here we've done an interesting thing. This is the coarse fraction. This is because we had to differentiate this coarse fraction because the harm from PM2.5 is actually contained within PM10. And so if you were to consider both of these together when evaluating a contaminant, you're double counting. So when evaluating harm, we don't actually consider PM10, we consider the coarse fraction instead. We do give numbers for harm for PM10, but when considering the total harm, which is where you add up the harm from all the contaminants that you may be exposed to in an indoor environment, we only consider the coarse fraction. So the most harmful contaminants then, the top 5 here would be PM10, PM2.5, chromium-7, nitrogen dioxide, formaldehyde, and then the coarse fraction. And if we combine those two together, we end up with the total harm from exposure to different contaminants. And you guys were right. You thought that PM10 and PM2.5 mattered the most. You're dead right. You've obviously read all the work that's come out of Lawrence Berkeley and elsewhere. And it shows that PM10 is probably the most harmful, but bear in mind, contained in that, it's PM2.5. So this is is PM2.5. So we're interested in PM2.5 the most. The coarse fraction is harmful, but it's almost an order of magnitude less harmful than PM2.5. We're also interested in nitrogen dioxide, formaldehyde, radon, and ozone. And thereafter, things start to drop off. Now, the human brain doesn't work very well with logarithmic axes. So I'm going to show you on a linear axis now just how very much more harmful the particulate matter is than other contaminants. So you can see here that the two particulate matters are very much more harmful than nearly all other contaminants here. And if you wanted to regulate a few, then you would probably pick these here that are seemingly substantially above that baseline. Another tree forest plot for you that shows that these 6 contaminants account for 99.5% of all harm. Now, what's interesting here is that the most harmful volatile organic compound is formaldehyde. And it's the only volatile organic compound that seems to matter here, which means that we really can forget about the TVOC metric. There are very good reasons to forget about the TVOC metric, but this is an empirical reason. So if we add up the harm, all the DALY numbers for all these contaminants, excluding PM10, we end up with a total medium harm estimated to be 2,200 DALYs per 10 to the 5 people per year, which we can then start to consider against our values for alcoholism, smoking, and transport injuries. Now that gives us a real perspective. Now, of course, if your contaminant concentrations change, i.e. you take a different stock of homes, so for example, if you were to just consider Indian homes, you may find that the total number of DALYs, you will find that the total number of DALYs will change. So in India, for example, I would expect this to go up quite a lot, given the quality of your outdoor air. So here are the numbers then. PM 2.5 is the most harmful contaminant by almost an order of magnitude. It leads to 1,600 DALYs per 10 to the 5 people per year compared to 130 from the coarse fraction, 120 from nitrogen dioxide, 120 from formaldehyde, and then 34 from radon and 10 from ozone. I've given the harm intensities here too, so that if you have your own concentrations of these contaminants, then you can calculate your own values of harm. So we designate these 6 contaminants as contaminants of concern. And we just started to write some regulation here in the UK for the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers, sorry, not regulation, guidance. And these harm intensity values are going to go into that guidance. Because we're operating in the linear form of the dose-response relationship, there's probably thresholds above which you are going to overestimate the harm from these contaminants. So if your concentration of PM 2.5 is above 50 micrograms per meter cubed, then you're going to overestimate the harm. I know that that is true in many Indian cities today, but nevertheless, if you were to use these values of harm intensity, that would give you a conservative estimate of harm. So let's now go back to these WHO threshold values for PM 2.5, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. And remember that their threshold limit values are 5, 10, and 60 microns per cubic meter, respectively. Now let's consider what would happen to the concentrations of these threshold limit values if each threshold limit value was to lead to the same harm. Now, the harm intensity of PM 2.5 is 60. So if we multiply that through by the 5 microns per cubic meter threshold limit value for PM 2.5, that gives us a harm of 300 disability adjusted life years per 10 to the 5 people per year. And we would expect these threshold limit values for nitrogen dioxide and ozone to go up if you also wanted to achieve the same harm limit from these contaminants too. However, I can see that you might be uneasy with that. Why might we allow more harm to people? Well, I would say that that probably isn't a very good thing, but it is a good thing if the threshold limit values all lead to the same harm. A problem with this approach is that it isn't flexible at all, and it doesn't consider all the contaminants of harm. I want to introduce you now to the concept of a harm budget. A harm budget sets an acceptable limit of population harm, like those for the smoking, the transport, and the alcoholism that I showed you. Arguably, tobacco smoking harm might be considered acceptable to governments. Otherwise, they might do a little more about it. So for acceptable indoor air quality, our exposure to contaminants would be any combination of contaminants, so long as the harm value stays below some budget. So this approach is actually used by the WHO, who define a tolerable disease burden of 10 to the -6 DALYs per 10 to the per 100,000 people per year for drinking water. Now, if we were to set a harm budget for that, we would have to make such radical changes to our outdoor and indoor air quality. I think we'd have real trouble doing it. So how do we set an appropriate level of harm? Well, we looked at a study that already has measured contaminants in a large number of homes. Here we have Brett Singer's evaluation of 70 homes in California that meet the California air quality code and therefore ASHRAE 62.2. And so they all comply with that code. And inside of those homes, particulate matter was found to have a concentration of 5 microns per cubic meter, formaldehyde 23, and nitrogen dioxide 9 microns per cubic meter. They didn't measure radon and ozone. So we set guideline values for those. And then we calculated the harm from exposure to those and added it all up. And it comes to a total harm of 600 DALYs per 10 to the 5 people per year. Now, this might be a place to start because the regulation already exists. And so if you meet the regulation, which is ASHRAE 62.2, or if you're in California, the California Home Standard, and then compare this against what we find in homes around the world, alcoholism, smoking, and transport injuries, you can see that if we all meet ASHRAE 62.2, then our harm in homes is likely to come down quite a lot. So what next? We're starting to consider standardizing harm intensities where it is considered in relative terms, so using a dimensionless magnitude, but you'll have to watch this space to see how that goes. We're really interested to hear from you, to hear your comments on this. We've tried to keep the maths as straightforward because regulators and engineers and architects want things that are straightforward so they can apply them. Many rules of thumb that already exist in our community are there because they're simple. So how do we get this implemented? How do we get this into our building codes? How do we make our homes safer? And I'd really like to hear from you on this. I'd just like to thank my colleagues. I didn't do this work alone, and most of the work was done by Gioberti Morates Quintana here at Nottingham, who's spent most of the pandemic locked away, crunching numbers to produce this data. And the work was funded by the University of Nottingham itself. Very difficult to get funding for this kind of work, and by the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers. So here are the summary slides of the 4 points that I hope I've made and what we've done. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin, for explaining how the most harmful contaminants can be identified so that they can be prioritized for removal from the indoor environments. So maybe we can take up the questions that have been coming in during the moderated discussion in the end. Okay. So moving forward to our next poll, we would like to know from everyone who has joined in on where does the challenge lie? Which indoor air quality pollutant do you believe is the most challenging to control or mitigate effectively? Okay. Okay, so we know that PM has the greatest harm, and most of them, 58%, have responded that PM is the most challenging to control as well. So even if we control the pollutants, due to indoor human activities, controlling the outdoor pollutants, especially like the PM in indoors due to infiltration, becomes a challenge. And if the ambient air is highly polluted, this will affect the indoor air quality despite good ventilation strategies or other actions. We will now hear from Dr. Sunil Gulia on the particulate matter like PM10, PM2.5, and most particularly the finer and ultra-fine particles, and how they are influenced by internal as well as external sources. He will also touch upon the unique management strategies to bring down at acceptable levels. Dr. Gulia is working as the senior scientist at CSIR NIRI, the Delhi Zonal Center. He is also a founding member of the Society for Indoor Environment. He has more than 15 years of experience in the field of air quality management. He has coordinated various capacity building training program on air quality management and published more than 40 research articles, book chapter in peer-reviewed journals. He has coordinated many major research projects with expertise in air quality modeling, urban air quality management, source allocation, pollution emission inventory development, and indoor air quality. Welcome, Dr. Gulia, and over to you.
Thank you, Dipanjali, and good afternoon to all of you. So, first of all, thank you for giving this opportunity to present this work, which is actually a combination of different small studies carried out by different master students and project staff in our office. And so basically, from the Dr. Benjamin presentation, it is clear that out of, if we going to prioritize the pollutants, so PM 2.5, and it's coming on the top, and it's more toxic compared to the other pollutants. And when we talk in the particulate matter, it is very important to understand which size of the particle is important to be considered and which is more harmful than. So I'm not the expert of the health, but I do some kind of assessment in indoor as well as outdoor, and understand the size of the particles and how its movement in the air. So today I'm going to present this assessment findings of the few assessment studies on fine and ultra fine particles in indoor environment of different office buildings. Generally, we talk about the indoor pollutants in residential buildings, which is impacted by these kitchen emissions and all. But in the office building also, there is a need to be considered the indoor air quality, as the employees, occupants spend at least 8 hours daily or 5 days in a week in the office hours. So that's so in the presentation, I'm going to cover these some of the points of the related to indoor air pollutions, and then finally focus on the monitored result. So we all know that from the previous presentations and last few sessions on the indoor air pollutions by EDS. So indoor air pollution ranked as one of the risks to public health throughout the world, and it is well documented now by different international organizations and regulators also, especially WHO, ISRE. They all have given the standards and guidelines how to control and what should be the indoor air quality level. So people spend most of their time in indoor, so definitely the exposure time for indoor air pollutants is more compared to outdoor. Air quality significantly affect the human health and attributed to the quality of life and productivity of the work environment in the office. So the possible factors, if I list, it's a building occupants, how much occupants we are adjusting in a given space. So that's important to be one of the factors which affect the IAQ of the building. Air tightness of the building, poorly designed HVAC system and its operation. There are indoor sources. We generally understand more about the outdoor sources like vehicles, industries, and these open biomass burnings. But in the indoor also, there are many sources which we are going to be discussing in next few slides, which affect the indoor air quality and affect the productivity of the person. And there is definitely a major source is infiltration from the outdoor sources. Then what's happened when there is a enclosed spaces inhabited by humans produce following effects generally. So these are like a reduction in oxygen levels in the space, and which ultimately affect the productivity and health. Increase in carbon dioxide levels, increase in temperature, humidity, and increase in bioaerosols and odor. When there is a activity happen inside the indoors, all these impact or features comes, and then finally there is a increase in particulate matters, which is going to be discussed in next few slides, and that's the major concerns, because it's always impact the respiratory system as well as the toxicity of the particulate matter affect the health and other portions of organs of the body. So in a typical office building, we feel this kind of there are many sources, okay, which we feel directly or indirectly affect the indoor air quality. The major one, we can say that it's an infiltration from the outdoor environment. So the design of the building, entrance of the building should be in such a way that it should be minimized, or it should be not impacted directly. Then building and construction material and furnaces, we generally say that good looking building material or a attractive paint is not emitting any pollutants. It's not like that. These building materials and the paint also emits VOCs and impact the indoor air quality. Building occupants and activities, definitely we all are also work as a pollutants, like we release CO2 in the indoors. And inadequate building design and maintenance, poor HVAC systems again impact the indoor air quality and the movement of pollutants inside the indoor spaces. So these are the pictures clearly shows that what type of pollutants is coming from which type of sources, like vehicles generate more carbon monoxides, benzenes, which enters into the indoor environment and then affect the occupant. There is a carpet is also one of the source. Resuspension of the floor dust when we move, do activity, cleaning, that's a resuspend the dust, deposited dust resuspend again. The wet items generally release bioaerosols, and also major source of these bioorganisms. So all these are the things which we need to be take care and accounted properly, so that the IAQ can be managed in a systematic way. So let's discuss some of the case studies in Delhi, where we have assessed and measured the different sized particles. So in one of the studies, a few studies I have already published in the form of book chapters or research papers. And in the conference proceeding also, we discussed these findings before. So one of the small tasks we have taken in Delhi in considering 3 different buildings located in 3 different directions. Like building 1 is in South Delhi, near to IIT Delhi, we can say. And another one is again in South Delhi, near to Vasant Kunj area. And the third one is Central Delhi, which is comparatively cleaner environment, more green area compared to the South Delhi regions. And these 3 buildings have a different features. So when there is a need to be assessed any kind of pollutants in indoor, it is very important and essential to understand the building design, its size, its activities, and surrounding environments. So as we discussed in the previous slides, that there are many sources which is present in the outside as well as inside also. So it's always good to understand the building structures, HVAC systems, and its size, its movement of the pupils, and where it is located. So this is the comparative table which shows the features of buildings, 3 buildings, and we can say that all the monitoring in 3 buildings has been done in December 2018, but not on the same day. So we are not going to compare the activity level in between the buildings, but we are going to present here a little bit about this, what are the activity and what's the level of pollutant in this one. So here the building 1 is basically a typical old building, office building, which have lots of old files, old records, cabins, and having a poor ventilated systems. And we can say it's 30 to 40 years old building. Whereas building 2 is a modern office building, clean, spacious hall, new infrastructure, 1 or 2, 3 years old building only, no open files, located at a lower ground floor. Means it's a ground or basement, means lower ground floor, the office is there. And office is a part of shopping mall. Okay, so there are other activities also going on in the outside the office gate. And in building 3, it is old and very well maintained building. The building is old, but it's very well maintained, high movement of people for meeting, discussion, and no public dealings, office daily cleaning activities. So this kind of features always need to be noted, because now then you have to correlate the monitored levels with this building, and need to find out the reason what's the this one. So just a pictorial view, how the different offices is looking. So the building 1 is, you can see that old office buildings, old this almiras and all, some empty rooms, you can say that. But in the building 2, it's clean and more organized way. Building 3, I'm not going to show due to some permission issues. So now you can see that the level of different size particulate, PM10, 2.5 and PM1. So we have used a particle counter monitor here, that's a green, which is calibrated and give a different 31 channel particle sizes, and then we have averaged them and divided into this based on the sizes PM10, 2.5 and PM1, which is generally referred in research media and other calculation of the indexes. So we found that there are high variations in different hall or different indoor rooms, and in overall sense, in building 1, the level of PM10, 2.5 and 1 were is 101 microgram per meter cube, 72 microgram per meter cube, and 64. So I'm not going to say that it's poor or bad. Then we need to be compare it with this standards. But as in the previous 2 slides, we have in the previous 2 presentation, we've seen that the PM 2.5 level as per WHO is only 5 microgram per meter cube. But that's on the annual basis. These monitored results are on 15 or 20 minutes monitoring basis. So that need to be directly to correlate and compare and say anything. It's not a good idea. So generally in the building 1, the proportion of PM 2.5 and PM1 in total overall PM10 is 71% and 63%. Similarly, in the building 2, it is 79 and 71%. So we here is saying that the ultrafine or finer particles in the overall PM in indoor environment is significantly high when we compare it with the outdoor air, which is generally in the range of 30 to 40%. So here the proportion of ultrafine and finer particles are more, and these are the particles which I think enter deep in the body system and interact with bloods and impact the nervous system and cardiovascular system. That the health expert can explain more in that. And in the building 3, the proportion of these particles are reached up to 82 and 76%. And in building 3, we also found the opportunity what's the level during the non-meeting hours and during the meeting hours. These are the big hall where around 500 people's 400 to 500 peoples can accommodate at a time. So in that one, during the meeting non-meeting hours, the level are 119 to 129 for PM10, then accordingly less for PM 2.5 and 1. But during the meeting hours, the same level almost reached 100 more than 100 micrograms. So that 119 converted into the 216 values. So you can see the level, how the occupants in a building or in a room can increase the level of particles. Then further, we have compared what are the proportion and distribution of different size segregated particles in the indoor environment. And we found that the finer particles having less than 1 micron is a higher proportion in all indoor environment or indoor offices like account office, reception areas, and these library rooms, store rooms. The finer particle, ultra finer particles are dominant and compared to other size particles or coarser particles. And when we see that the higher particles, like between 10 to 30 micron, is least in numbers. So that's the situation in all three buildings. You can say that the red portion is clearly indicating this higher proportion, these red circles. So and we found that higher proportion of ultra fine and finer particles in indoors compared to outdoors. Okay, and indoor environment which have direct opening to the outside environment. So undisturbed and closed area have higher proportion of the ultra fine particles. That may be due to any reasons, or possible of other we can say VOCs, bioaerosols, which also be monitored like as a part of finer particles. Further, we have compared the indoor and outdoor ratios, and the red line in all these graphs shows the one when indoor outdoor ratio is 1, and then we see that what are the different size particles behave in different buildings. And when this is the building one which is very old and having a old office records and all typical building, unorganized building, in this one the higher part, this fine ultra fine particles less than 1 microgram 1 micron is always found higher in the indoor environment compared to the outdoor, where other sizes are higher during in the outdoor side, indicating by the low I/O ratio. So that's the findings of this one, and this is the way also we can analyze the data in different micro environment of the building, any building, and see that the office having a high occupant can be is more indoor polluted than the office or rooms having a less occupied office. Further, in another study, we have done a PM level in one of the research laboratory. That's our NIRI laboratory in West Delhi area in Narayana, where we have compared the PM levels, all three size PM before renovations and after renovations. So that renovation time took some time. So we have done the monitoring in 2018 August period, and then again into September 2022. And we found that in the same office, if we replaced and with new infrastructure, with some clean modern infrastructure, with some better cleaning practices, how we can improve the levels of this different size particles. And we can see that during the 2018 before renovations, the levels of PM10 2.5 are in the range of 114, 58 and 33 microgram per meter cube, and at find lowest at the undisturbed area, but the proportion of PM1 in the undisturbed area is again higher compared to the disturbed area. So that's the finding which is matching with the findings of the other office buildings when we did the 3 building studies. This is again when we do the any kind of particle size analysis and the indoor PM assessment. So we need to plot and to understand that which size particles are more prominent and more dominant in the overall PM in different office buildings. And we see that a storeroom which is totally undisturbed area and hardly open in a month or 2 months, once at a time, when we keep the our unused materials and all, is find higher ultra fine particles compared to admin office, which is daily found a activity and lots of movement of the office bearers. Then we did the same kind of monitoring assessment with the same instrument, with the same rooms, and we compared it with the, this time we compared it with the outside also, and we found that the level of pollution is comparatively less when we did before the renovation. Definitely the time period is huge, but as I said, that it's not a part of any projects and all. These are the small work which we have done and compiled in the form of some R&D work, and you can see the difference when we compare it. Further, then always there is a questions that what we are monitoring through these sensor-based devices and all, are they really useful or they really give a accurate result? So to further counter that and to further give more analysis on that, we have compared the PM 2.5 data of indoor with the outdoor CAQMS stations, which is located just 1 kilometer away from our building as per aerial distance. And we found that the pattern of daily pattern during the weekday and weekend is compared and matching with the CAQMS, that is a regulatory stations, and these patterns are more or less matched. Definitely there is a less value by this sensors, but that can be due to the indoor and outdoor, we can say that. And the pattern in during the weekend and weekdays, we found it's clearly that they are matching with the indoor patterns. This is the comparative tables, which shows how we can say that the office, within the office, the level is 32 to 33 is reduced to 23 to 28 on average basis, combining all the office rooms. Then storerooms, 33 is reduced to 23. So because we have renovated the this storeroom also, and canteen also 57 to 24 to 28, because there is no change in the cooking practices much, but we have organized it that the number of peoples and the office bearer is same in 2018 and 2020. So the practices of cooking is more or less same, but it still find better result. Then here I also suggest that when we do any kind of indoor air quality monitoring, we need we are generally depend on the portable sensors or portable monitors. So before use that, it is always better to select a more calibrated, validated sensors, reliable, which understand and give more accurate result. And that's need to a field calibration along with the factory calibrations. It is also required to do the field calibration, as these sensors are very sensitive and highly affected with the environmental conditions, especially the temperature and relative humidity. So in this exercise, parallelly we did that kind of exercise. We have selected 4 different make sensors and compared it with the reference monitors in the indoor as well as in the outdoor. In the indoor, we have done it through the a calibrated GRIM particle counter, we can say that instrument, and in outdoor we have compared it with the CAQMS, and you can see that the levels and the pattern is more or less same for 3 of them, and the sensor number 3 and 2 are more close to the CAQMS. So we, for this study, we have considered sensor 3. So it's not like that we have directly purchased it from a vendor and we have used it. No, we have selected it, compared it with the reference monitors, and then we have used it. After that, we have procured 7 sensors of the same make, which we have selected for best one out of 4, and we'll see that how they are responding to each other. And we found that more or less is matching with a 5 or 10% variations, which need to be taken and corrected when we do the monitoring, because the 2 devices can never be give a same result. So they have some variations, and we have done that so that when we do the monitoring in the different microenvironment, so that corrections or error or difference between the 2 instruments can be corrected. So that's all from the assessment side. So for some kind of suggestions, I suggest that the things everyone in the building can do, we need to be aware of the IAQ and the pollutants and the smells which we feel when we working in the office. So everyone should do not block air vents, comply with the office and building smoking policies. Definitely the personal smoking, these are the source of indoor air pollutants. Clean up all water spills properly, water and maintain office plants properly, and report water leakage right away, because the wet conditions always generates bioaerosols, and which again is not good for a breathing air. Need to adopted best cleaning practices with eco-friendly cleaning agent. We generally use harmful cleaning agents which evaporates and generates VOCs in the indoor environment, and that's again another pollutants we are generating in the indoor. Dispose of garbage promptly and properly in a closed dustbin. Store food properly. All these are the sources of bioaerosols, and which work as a major health hazards, especially in Indian conditions. Notify your building or facility manager immediately if you suspect an IAQ problem. So in the last point, it is very important to appoint a facility managers who can also take care of the IAQ problem, listen to the office bearers, and work promptly to solve the problems. So some of the more detailed guidelines you can get it from the USEPA guidelines for office building occupants. I also taken all these things from there, and from my experience, which I feel during my office hours. And so final takeaway from these few studies are that the proportion of fine and ultra fine particles were more in indoor compared to the outdoor environments. So that's a clear from the 3-4 studies which we have done in the different buildings, that we have found ultra fine particles more in the indoor environment. The concentration of particulate matter was found higher in higher activity area compared to undisturbed area. So definitely the level of PM is higher because there is a resuspensions due to the movement of the people, and handling of different office equipments, files, and also all these are disturb the environment, and that's increase the movement of particles. The concentration of PM were found higher at reception area and in cafeteria and pantry area in all building compared to other area. Definitely, it's understood that the activity is more there. High level of PM can be due to opening and closing of doors and infiltration of the outdoor air. PM 2.5 level reduced in the building after renovations, which might be due to the efficient ventilation system. That's, I forgot to tell that we have improved the ventilation system in the renovated building, and we have good air conditioning systems and all in this one. So that all improvement in internal design and HVAC systems help to improve the indoor air quality. Calibrated sensor should be used for the monitoring of indoor PM along with the other gaseous parameters and relative humidity and temperatures. So it's always good, suggested that the sensors or the monitor should be calibrated and should be advanced. And every occupant should be aware about the IAQ level of the building, and everyone should know that whom to approach if feel uncomfortable. So that's all from my side now, and happy to discuss any questions if there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sunil Gulia. Yeah, so it was, absolutely interesting to see how certain pollutants were higher in certain spaces. It is crucial to identify the source of the pollutant and design elimination strategies around it, in existing buildings. So, moving forward, as you can see on your screen, some of these strategies. I would like to ask you all, which of these strategies or actions, are most likely to take to improve indoor air quality in your home or in your workspace. So again, we can wait for a minute, to get everyone to respond. So thank you, everyone, once again. Well, it's very clear, that increasing ventilation by opening windows and doors or, replacing or cleaning the HVAC system and filters receive the most votes. So we have a range of options to consider. And it is important to recognize the importance of good indoor air quality to create healthier and more comfortable environments in our homes and workspaces. So with that, I would now like to open the floor for a discussion with our speakers, Dr. Benjamin Jones and Dr. Sunil Gulia. I would now like to also welcome Nidhi Gupta to kindly moderate this session. Over to you, Nidhi.
Okay, great. Thank you, both of you. So I would start with the poll that was there right now, right? And a lot of people said, look, we need to consider opening windows and doors. I mean, it's possibly the easiest strategy. But in India, like especially in areas where we are, the outdoor or the ambient isn't really good enough. So should we really wait for the outdoor air to be cleaned to look at indoor or look at IAQ? And in the context that we are, is opening doors and windows yet a good strategy? Any of you can answer.
This is a really difficult question. Because the environments I'm used to dealing with are where outdoor air is normally not great, but normally indoor air has worse quality than the outdoor air, and normally we take three approaches. So the first approach indoors is to work out where your sources are, where they're coming from, deal with those straight away. Some sources you can't deal with, like cooking. You're not going to persuade people to cook outside, probably. Certainly not here, it's cold. So we don't want to cook outside. So what do? Well, you can't remove the source, so then you need to provide systems that are able to extract the contaminants released by cooking. And that's both the particulate matter, when you fry stuff, you get this wonderful aromats coming off the spices, or when you fry onions or meat or whatever. That produces particulate matter, and that particulate matter is coated in polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are carcinogens. So ideally, then you'd need targeted ventilation to get that outside, and then I'm guessing that probably you're likely to end up with air quality indoors that is worse than that outdoors. So open your windows, but maybe isolate your kitchen, close your kitchen door if you have a kitchen door or whatever. And then third thing then is general dilution. So if you can't provide source control, you can't provide targeted ventilation, then so the general dilution is the opening of windows. But looking at Dr. Gulia's really interesting presentation, it seems prime target for air cleaning technologies, using filtration. You can make these can be homemade. The Corsi Rosenthal box has taken off massively in America as a consequence of the pandemic, but it strikes that really cheap, simple to use filtration systems in buildings in India is an even better application for them, and a good business opportunity for somebody who's entrepreneurially minded.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. Dr. Gulia, would you like to add something? Or
Yeah. Benjamin is rightly pointed out, like that some of the sources we can't avoid it, but we can minimize the exposure by separating the kitchen with the common rooms. Because in here in Delhi itself, if I talk about in Dwarka somewhere, so there are houses which don't have any partition between the common area and the kitchen. Okay, but if you go in the Noida side and all. you will find that there is a partition, proper door is there, which is separated the main house with the kitchen, and the kitchen has a very good ventilation system. So whatever the emissions from the cooking practices is coming, it's goes out, not coming directly to the houses. Yeah, and definitely if we put some kind of curtains or some kind of things on the door when we use in the houses, so that can help to allow the outside air in, means the natural airs in the indoors. So that kind sort of things is there, and definitely we need to be look more on the eco-friendly materials in the office as well as and in the buildings, and avoid that things which is not be good for indoor air quality.
Thank you. So, Dr. Jones, we saw that, you had this entire database and studies which were based out of the global north, right?
Right.
How much of this data thresholds would you say, are transferable to South Asia or, our countries here? And and what studies do you anticipate would be required in our specific context? So that would be an interesting thing to do.
So the harm doesn't change, or the way of calculating harm doesn't change. Nitrogen dioxide in India is exactly the same as nitrogen dioxide in the UK. So that the harm intensity metrics can be used any way you like. They could be used in a space station if you wanted to use them in a space station. So what we really need then in India is an understanding, which is exactly what Dr. Gulli has been doing, of contaminant concentrations over periods of time, and therefore what people might be exposed to. Because then you can use those and combine them with the harm metrics, and you can come up with your own values of harm, even just from the particulate matter that Dr. Gulli has measured. So that could be combined very quickly and very easily to come up with a metric, a value for harm, which could then be compared against other known harms, either worldwide, such as the smoking, the transport, and the alcoholism, or in your own communities. Because I'm fairly sure you could find national data on that will give you those values.
So then the follow-up question to Dr. Gulia is, should we, is there already enough research to, being done on continuous indoor air quality monitoring in India so far? Because we see studies being done disparately, but do we have enough research already being done to develop metrics like what Dr. Jones is doing? So, or where do you see our next step should be?
For in the state go, it's I say no. There we don't have enough data in indoor. We have good data for outdoor, but for indoor we don't have any data much, which is we can say that it is can be combined throughout the India and can draft some policies or standards. In India, we are still struggling with the formulating of the standards, which we need to be set. And I think in the recently last year, there is some guidelines or some orders from the NGT also, so that the regulators should develop the indoor air quality standards, especially for the public spaces with large mall area, hospitals and all. So that standards needs database, which we need to be developed. So right now, some more studies need to be done at a large level or city level, so that the data can be generated and then policy can be formulated.
Thank you. So, I think maybe we should start mandating, buildings to have indoor air quality or continuous indoor air quality monitoring as a first step. But I haven't seen many countries actually move towards mandating indoor air quality, as such.
I can make a point on that. We have thresholds in the UK. They're in our building regulations, but I don't know anyone who's ever measured them. So how do you enforce these? So it's not just whether you have them, but we have the thresholds. We then have to work out how people are going to measure them. What are you going to measure them with? Where are you going to measure them in the room? What over what period of time is an acceptable measurement? So these are called diagnostics generally, and we don't have the diagnostics. So ultimately, then they're unenforceable in their current form, which is why we tend to like ventilation rates and even better carbon dioxide concentrations. So CO2 concentrations are a good start for working out how much air is coming in, but it won't tell you much about the quality of the air.
Yes, thank you. So one more question. I mean, you shared the harm from each contaminant perspective, and there could be a combination of, I mean, in indoor environment, you have combination of contaminants that you're exposed to. So is there, I mean, does the harm of a combination, would it change? Like, how would that be accounted for, the synergistic, aspects between two contaminants or the three contaminants, because you're not always just exposed to just one, right? So if the thresholds for 2 or 3 are different.
Yes, so there are synergistic effects, but we don't account for those because the data that we've got, 827 data sets, we don't know whether two contaminants were present at the same time that may have the synergistic effects. That's the first point. The second is that the synergistic effects. So what we mean by synergistic effects is sometimes when you're exposed to two contaminants at the same time, the resulting harm is worse than if you were to add up the harm from the individual contaminants together. But what the literature tells us is that those synergistic effects tend to occur at quite high concentrations, and not those that we're finding in buildings generally. So one is we can't do it, and two is we probably don't need to do it.
Oh, okay. So again, just another question. I mean, I think there's some questions on CO2. Like, I mean, we do see a lot of CO2 amongst scientific communities, I mean, is not considered as a pollutant, right? But there is a lot of monitoring for CO2, like you mentioned already. So how would you consider that, if that, when we're talking from a monitoring perspective, is it an indicator for, whether I would be having other pollutants in the space? I mean, or it's an independent monitoring parameter on its own?
Yeah, so shall I answer first, and then Dr. Gully can pick up on me if I make any errors. There are a great number of papers coming out of the National Institute of Science and Technology in the States, published by Andy Pasilli on the role of CO2 in the built environment. He often feels it's being wildly misused. You have to remember that the source of CO2 in most spaces, in the absence of combustion and animals, is solely people. So you have a contaminant source that you know where it comes from. The second thing about CO2 is it's only removed by dilution. It's only removed by outdoor air coming in and it being then diluted and removed outside. Whereas particulate matter is removed by other mechanisms. It deposits on surfaces. It may coagulate, it may amalgamate, it may change phase, and depending on the source of the pollutant of the PM, then you may get a combination or one of those, or you definitely get the deposition, but you may not get the others. Therefore, the removal rate is entirely different to that of CO2. So to equate CO2 to say a particulate matter concentration or an infectious aerosol concentration is entirely wrong. You just can't do it. So all it tells you is how much outdoor air is coming in and the rate at which that it's diluted. As a function of the metabolic activity of the people and the demographics of the people inside. Children tend to emit a lot less CO2 than men working out in a gym, for example. That help?
Yes, Dr. Gulia, if you would like to expand. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed the question initially, and somebody was there. So can you say some?
So I was just asking you from, CO2 we generally see is the most common parameter, right, measured. And does it actually have any reflections on other pollutants or contaminants in the space? Dr. Benjamin already answered us to a certain extent that, it really doesn't correlate except talking about freshness. So we definitely need monitoring of other specific contaminants.
Yeah, rightly said that. It's just an indoor air quality indicator, okay, and not correlating with the other pollutants, especially the particles. It's not correlating anything, and there's a CO and CO2 can be counted, but not much, because CO after sometimes converted into the CO2, but in indoor, what's the actual chemistry is going on in that need to be understood. But I don't know.
Oh, you also mentioned specifically what I found interesting in your search was the importance of the ultra-fine particulate matter, the PM1, right? And we saw in Dr. Benjamin's study also 2.5 having the PM 2.5 having a larger impact. Would it be interesting to do some sort of a study on the harm for that PM1 proportion? Would it be actually required to a certain extent? Or are we okay with, anyways, we are considering PM 2.5. Do we need to get into the ultra fine particulate matter?
Okay. Yeah, actually, in the health impact of ultrafine particle and nanoparticle is also discussing in the other part of the world, and but not much in the India. But I must say that the finding or takeaway from these monitoring result is that when we are going to be develop any kind of standards in future for especially for indoor air quality, we should consider the ultrafine particle also and its health impacts, which need again studies. Right now, not much study on that. So this is the, I think we can say, takeaway from the analysis of this small monitoring work. When we are going to be develop any guidelines, we should consider ultrafine particles, and that's a priority pollutants we can say for indoor air quality.
Dr. Benjamin, you wanted to add something?
I agree with Dr. Gulia that it's really important. We're starting to understand that it has some pretty severe health effects, but at the moment we're not in a position to be able to quantify the harm from them because the data doesn't exist. We haven't been measuring them for very long. We've been measuring PM10s for a long time because it's been pretty easy to do. We've more latterly been measuring PM 2.5s, I think for a couple of decades now, but we don't have standard measurements of PM1s outdoors, certainly not in the UK, I believe. I don't know whether you do in India, Dr. Gulia, but it may not be necessary to regulate the different size fractions indoors if they all come from the same source. So if your source is outdoor air, then you need filtration that filters all of them, or as many as possible. If your source is cooking is a great source of PM1s, unfortunately. So then you need something that deals with that. But it's also a source for PM 2.5s and for PM10. So, and the different size fractions. So I guess that the challenge comes is if there's a specific source of PM1s that doesn't emit the larger size fractions too.
And in our Indian cooking styles, we generally not burn the fuel. We also burn the raw material also. When we do the prantas and all, so lots of particles is emitting from that activities also. So it's a from the both side, from the fuel as well as from the raw materials. Right. So that's need to be segregated and differentiated.
Right. I'm cognizant of the time, and I think we are just meeting time, but thank you both for answering the questions that have been posed. I will share the questions with you which have not been answered, so maybe we can answer them after and share them ahead with the participants. But thank you very much. I mean, it has been a very insightful and engaging session, and actually guiding us to the research that is required, that India requires right now, in terms of monitoring, in terms of actually, it's not only the thresholds, right? It's the harm. So again, looking at that, because that's kind of a study which needs to be done and it's required for us to guide policy. Great. Thank you very much. I will hand this back over to Dipanjali. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin and Dr. Sunil Gulia. So this was an enriching discussion, and we all have some, fruitful food for thought and actions, and reminding that, small changes can lead to significant improvements. Before we conclude today's session, I would want to express warmest regards on behalf of the entire CAVH team to our experts, Dr. Benjamin and Dr. Sunil, for joining us today and sharing your experience and insights. To all participants who have joined us today, thank you for your active engagement and thoughtful questions. We appreciate your time and your contributions and your commitment to learning and sharing with the community. So stay tuned for our next dialogue on our social media platforms, which will be in mid-December. With that, we bring our webinar to a close. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.